Hello and assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to Lahori Talks. This is once again Waleed Ahmed Shahzad, and today we are joined by another very special guest. That is, of course, none other than Naman Verma. Naman, how are you doing?
I believe them good. How are you?
I'm perfectly fine. I hope everything's fine on your side of the country in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, it is. I mean, we're all quarantining and it's, going pretty good, but then the cases are still coming up. So we're hoping for the best.
Yeah, no, it's similar to that here as well. But I'm not sure if you know, but in our last discussion, we actually discussed Kashmir, and we were talking about sort of its situation with regards to COVID-19. And today, I felt like maybe something that was lacking in the previous conversation, in the previous discussion, was that we didn't have a perspective from the Indian side, right? As to what do you guys sort of think about the entire situation and the policies of the Modi government. So that is something that I was hoping to discuss today. So I guess let's just get right into it. Firstly, before we sort of get into the recent affairs and what's sort of been going on in recent times, I think something that I want to sort of discuss is the history of Kashmir, because I feel like the perspective that you guys would have and the history that you guys would have learned would definitely be different from what we learned as children back in the day. So, what's your opinion on it? What are some of the things that you guys have learned in terms of Kashmir?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that yes, I do agree with you also that our histories might be altered a bit. But again, there's this thing that most of the things that we can trace about Kashmir, as per we've been taught, is that it has always been a place of extreme strategic importance, especially due to the rivers and all. And ever since the ancient times, when Kashmir was once ruled by the Sikhs, and then before that came the Mughals, who were overthrown by the Sikhs, and then the British. So it has always been a place of power replacement and a fight over its provinces, its resources. Again, what what we what we study in depth over here is about Kashmir, of what happened right after independence. So not much emphasis is done of about what happened before it, even though a lot of important events happened before independence. But then what we study is after independence only. So um, the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about the history is the partition.
Right.
Again, every person on either side of the border knows what happened and how it turned out. And to some extent, even today, the both the nations are suffering, I would say, if that's the right word to use, of what happened. So Kashmir went through a lot of changes. Firstly, the accession that took place. Accession that took place, and then they acceded to India. The Maharaja Hari Singh, if I'm not wrong,
Yeah.
um, acceded to India, and after that, all the turmoil started, and then came in the Chinese. Even though I don't know why, but we do not, talk much about the Chinese side of it, because they have also had a very crucial role to be played in the history of Kashmir, the Ladakh side. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
of India. So then they came, and after that, years went by. We had wars. Most people don't know that we had two Kargil attacks. One of them was a war, and the first one happened 9 months before the original one. Well, around 9 months, if I'm not wrong. Again, I'm not sitting with facts over here. So the first attack happened, and the Indian side did not react as much, and then we had a 2 month long Kargil war.
Yeah.
After
Yeah.
that, um, then we come to the 2000s and the next decade that started, and then most of the political turmoil that happened with maximum number of changes hell was between this time, especially recently when Article 370 was revoked. from the state, and autonomy was not was taken away from them, and then the curfew that was put on the internet services that went away, and there was a lot of things. But I think this media has played a huge role in a lot of aspects through Kashmir. So a lot of things that have happened to Kashmir. The timeline of Kashmir is long, vast, and has a lot of branches to it. But at the end of the day, for all we know, it's a place of extreme strategic importance, and two heavyweights are fighting over it.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I think one thing that I sort of want to elaborate a little bit on is you were talking about obviously accession and that side of thing, and I think this is one of the major points where there's sort of a variation in terms of what you guys might have learned and what sort of we on this side of the border have either learned or sort of dug into to get a little bit more details on. Because so what I know in terms of my research is there was an instrument of accession that was signed by Maharaja Hari Singh, as you mentioned previously. And I think there are two major sort of two major types of critique that's sort of given to the instrument of accession. The first one is obviously related to its dates. I'm not sure if you've heard about this before or not, but there's a huge argument with scholars and historians as to when exactly was the instrument of accession actually signed. Some say that it was signed on the 26th, and others say that it was signed on the 27th of October. I believe this was in 1947. And the reason this matters a lot actually is because, as far as my knowledge is concerned, and again, I'm not exactly a historian myself, but during 26th of October was the time when Hari Singh was actually traveling. And so one critique that people usually give to the instrument of accession is if it was signed on the 26th of October, then how exactly did Hari Singh actually create the instrument of accession while he was doing his travels? And wouldn't have it been more convenient for him to sort of wait a day and reach his office back in Jammu and Kashmir and then create the entire instrument of accession itself? And the second critique that we sort of get towards the instrument is by Professor Alistair Lamb, who was a British historian and actually is a British historian. He's quite old, but he still is alive and well. And he wrote two sort of major pieces on the region of Kashmir. The first one was his book, which was known as Kashmir, A Disputed Legacy. And I believe this covered from 1846 to 1999. I'm not exactly sure, but it was something along this line. And within this time frame, he mentioned inside that book that the form might have actually been printed in Delhi, and it might not have been created by the Maharaja at all. And then there was another piece that he wrote, which was known as The Myth of Indian Claim to Jammu and Kashmir. And over there, he mentioned that there was a white paper that was later on produced by India in 1948, in which they set out their formal case of Kashmir, but the form that was presented was actually unsigned. Now, obviously, these are two critiques of the instrument of accession, and obviously, your side, the Indian side, presents that the instrument of accession was signed by Maharaja Hari Singh and Kashmir was acceded to India, and hence it legally belongs to India. So these are two different perspectives that I've put forward. And obviously, I think it's difficult to tell which side is definitely true because there's a lot of different opinions in terms of scholars and historians, and it's difficult to find sources that are unbiased in terms of the history of Kashmir. And I think you would definitely agree to me with that as well, right?
Yes, I mean, Kashmir has been from ever since the beginning. Kashmir has been a land of such controversy and such conflict that in these cases, what we usually see is that the authorities, the government, tends to, you know, wipe out a few things, or alter a few things, and we don't exactly get what exactly happened.
I mean, a very good
However,
example is actually, in recent news, we always hear that, firing is happening over the line of control. And I think this is something that you've noticed. If we look at our side of the media, they would say that India is the one that is doing the firing. And if we look at the Indian side of the media, they would say that Pakistan is the one doing the firing. So,
exactly,
uh,
exactly.
yeah.
Then you have to keep your people on your side. So that is what is happening right now. In fact, that is what has been happening all this while, if we look at it closely. So, however, about the Hari Singh thing, um, what we have been taught is that Hari Singh was given uh, was given a choice, And then later, what he did was he waited for a while.
Mhm.
Some say that he was traveling at that time, and when he had to, when he had to sign the accession. Some say that Gandhi went to him and yeah, convince him. We have a lot of theories over here as well. However, the most widely accepted theory is that, again, I'll still call it a theory because of the reasons you put forward, and I am a firm believer in that too. However, the theory is the how widely accepted theory is that Hari Singh waited to make his decision. He did not want to rush into it, and then later, when all this happened, the Pakistani side of things, they got very agitated. They got really what do you call it? They got really irritated about waiting for their nation to get that place. So they launched an attack. Or the radicals launched an attack, I would say,
Mhm.
and then the Maharaja got an aid from the Indians. The government aided him and protected him, and that is why he signed the accession. And over here, it's usually accepted that it was signed on the 27th of October. But
Mhm.
then the traveling thing has always been a theory, just
Yeah.
like death of Subhash Chandra Bose. About if you know about it, he died in a plane crash, and his body was never to be found. Again, one of those theories where we have a lot of things that could
Mhm.
have happened. So that is what is accepted here. Again, you never know what is true. Like you said about the cross-border shootings. I mean, obviously, we won't. No nation would tell its people that we were the ones who fired first, whether it is India or is it Pakistan who fired first. So
Yeah, no,
that's
absolutely.
what.
And I think one more thing that would actually sort of solidify your stance of, my stance as well, when we're saying that most of these things that we're mentioning are just theories and it's very difficult for us to understand what the truth is because when we're talking about the entire incident that you mentioned with sort of Pakistan being the aggressor at the beginning, there are a lot of people over here that actually come up with counter arguments, and they mention that during the time in 1947 after the partition, Pakistan was actually a very relatively new country. And as a matter of fact, we didn't even have a very strong army during the time. Most of the top positions and officers and generals were actually British, and Jinnah had to hire them because a lot of the Pakistani side of the army wasn't well trained enough to lead from the top. And so, one sort of a question that a lot of scholars and historians raise is if, since considering that Pakistan's army and intelligence perhaps wasn't, and I don't even know if the intelligence existed back then, but the army itself wasn't even well established enough itself to sort of fight. How exactly would they come forward and plan a massive operation involving tribesmen and then sort of invading Kashmir? And then the second thing, obviously, that people there's another sort of theory on is you mentioned that obviously after the aggression, Hari Singh got aid from India and then decided to accede towards India. Another theory that I've sort of heard a lot of, and that is that it wasn't that wasn't actually the case. It was Hari Singh asked for India for simply just to give them aid. And it was after the army actually arrived in the region of Kashmir, it was that Hari Singh then decided to sign, if he signed the instrument of accession. Again, these are all theories. And the reason this is important is because then again, a lot of scholars and historians mention that if the signature was obtained after India arrived in Kashmir, it's very likely that the Maharaja was threatened and it was under pressure that he had to sign the instrument of accession and not actually from his own sort of will. But again, I think one thing that you and I have definitely established, keeping all of these theories in mind, is that it's very difficult, if not virtually impossible, for us to truly realize what the truth was and what were the actual set of events that occurred, considering just how much of a controversy the region of Kashmir has been. So, if there's anything else that you want to add, maybe you can do that, or other than that, otherwise we can definitely move forward.
That one last thing about that Hari Singh signing the accession and how we have different theories over here. So there's one neutral theory, that exact the one that I mentioned. It's that Hari Singh decided to wait for a few days.
Yeah.
I mean, you give your reason to a country, you get time for it. I mean, let's talk in real life. That is not something that you put up on an official document or an official article. That the guy wanted to wait, and
Mhm.
then that is the reason why all the agitation started. No, that is
Mm.
not something that happens. So that is the gray area I'm talking to you about. We don't know. That has
Yeah.
always been the problem between these two nations, especially. We don't know what what is going on.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. That's definitely completely correct. But I think I think we've talked definitely a lot about the history of the region. One thing that I do want to talk about, and this is related to the history itself, but it's definitely something very important, and that's sort of discussing previous resolutions of the United Nations on the conflict. And actually, more specifically, I want to discuss resolution number 47, which was signed in April 1948, because it's sort of the only important and most comprehensive resolution that was actually signed on the region of Kashmir. So, what's sort of your and perhaps the Indian perspective on the resolution and how sort of things went down with it?
So, like we both know that the resolution wasn't really followed by both the nations.
Mhm.
So, the 48, the 47 resolution, the 48 resolution that was given by the United Nations, it wanted us to give the people plebiscite rights,
Yeah,
to give them rights to choose between India, Pakistan, or having an
an
independent
independent.
state.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, um, again, now I have a theory about it. I would like to share it. The thing is that when you see what happened, let's trace it back to 47 again. What happens during partition? What happened? We know that there were riots, there were slaughtering people, Indian, like Hindus. I would say I use the word Hindu. Hindus on the side of newly created Pakistan were slaughtered. Muslims on the Hindi in the Indian side were slaughtered. And they were made to choose. Technically, they were made to choose between the two places, right? So a widely accepted notion over here is that Kashmir is a I won't say a very diverse region, but it is a diverse region. I mean, 40% of the people over there are non-Muslims. Now, if how would you like make them choose between India, Pakistan, or having an independent nation? Now, that is the question that has always been asked here. Also, it has always come up in theories that it will again lead to riots and the similar things that happened in 47 during the partition, when people have to choose and some of them will go to Pakistan, some of them, however, most of them will go to Pakistan because there is a Muslim population over there that radically believes, even
Hmm.
today, that they need a they demand a nation of their own. Like if you give the people that right, and then people will go to Pakistan or India. There is a lot of things that both the nations don't want to do. See, there are, again, I'll talk about the rivers. There are 5 rivers that flow uh, to Pakistan through India. So now they don't want to give in the rivers, because whoever gets that place, whoever takes that plebiscite, whoever makes that happen, gets control of the rivers, and no one wants to give away the rivers, because that's where most of the power that is generated in both the nations comes from. So that is also one thing, and I think a plethora of reasons has led to us, and by us I mean both the nations, not agreeing to the plebiscite.
Yeah, okay. So, firstly, obviously, I think it's better for some of the people watching, in case they don't actually know some of the clauses of the resolution, that I quickly summarize what Resolution 47 was actually about. The resolution started off, and this was actually the only resolution that has been passed that had a comprehensive plan for Kashmir by the UN. Beyond this point,
Yes.
all the resolutions that were passed simply reiterated this resolution, and I think the most latest one was in 1957, but even that one simply restated everything that was mentioned in this resolution, and that's about it. So, from the beginning, it started off with the first terms of the clause being that all the tribesmen that were within the region, they were to demilitarize. Now, the question obviously rises is whether they were actually involved with Pakistan or not, and so that's something that obviously starts off first of all, which is that Pakistan was supposed to ensure that these tribesmen left the region of Kashmir. And then after that, it started off with India that they would demilitarize, but they would demilitarize to a certain extent, and they would have the minimum amount of army that was required in the region. And by that, basically, what was mentioned inside the resolution was that they would only have army that would be required to keep order in the region, and beyond that, there would not be any extra personnel within the region. After this was done, India was to set up a plebiscite administration, which would, and the head of the plebiscite administration would be appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations. And then after this, when the conditions were right, and actually, as a matter of fact, this is how it was written in the resolution, when the conditions were right, a plebiscite would be held. So there's plenty of critique for the resolution itself. If we talk about it, I think the firstly is obviously that if India is going to keep military presence within the region, what ensures the fact that they actually go ahead with the rest of the resolution? And then the second, and I think perhaps the most major critique of the resolution, was that they mentioned the plebiscite administration and they mentioned the plebiscite, but they never gave a time frame of when the plebiscite was to be held. They just mentioned that when the conditions were right, a plebiscite was to be held. So that's one of the major critique, and obviously the resolution wasn't followed really by either side. If we're going down that road, and so that's sort of been the issue. And coming towards what you mentioned regarding the plebiscite, that obviously Kashmir is a diverse region, and how exactly would we decide where and what we are to do and how would we prevent the riots in the region? I think one question that I definitely have towards you guys is, wouldn't you say that regardless of how the decision would be taken later on and possible implications, don't you think that the region of Kashmir, regardless of all of this, should still be given the right to decide for themselves, or at least hold a plebiscite, even if action isn't taken on that plebiscite?
Well, it again comes to the question of how do we go about it. See, now if we take in perspective the whole situation between the two nations, it does it. Well, I mean, the whole the whole point behind us not following the United Nations solution is that we have a lot of emotion, a lot of history between the two places, and and believe it or not, even in political circumstances like this, even in decisions like this, it does come into play. There
Mm-hmm.
are let me take the example of the Kashmiri Pandits. Now they were displaced from there and they had to live in detention camps, not detention camp, they had to live in refuge camps in Jammu, and they lost all their land, they lost all their houses. Most of their kids don't even know where they belong. So again, it all comes down to that, the diversity, the emotion that has been connected to it. If a plebiscite is, in my opinion, again, if a plebiscite is held, there will be an agitation, there will be distress. That is what we feel. That is what I personally feel. But again, as per a world peace point of view, which United Nations had, yes, it is on paper. On paper, it is the right thing to do. On paper, but again, the world is not on paper, and we are living examples of that. Indian Pakistan.
Okay, so I think another sort of question that arises in terms of this is obviously, so you're sort of mentioning that there's going to be agitation if a plebiscite is held, and there's going to be unrest in the region, and maybe there'd be possible loss of life and so on and so forth. But wouldn't you say that keeping the current situation of Kashmir in mind and sort of the events that have happened, keeping in mind the fact that there have been considerable amounts of rebel forces in the past led by various people, and there have been protests by the region, by the population of Indian occupied Kashmir several times against the army, which has, and the Indian army I'm talking about, which has obviously resulted in the army having to use things like tear gas and pellets to keep the population in control. And we've seen many incidences of this being reported, and many pictures of this entire situation occurring. So wouldn't you then say that agitation and riot and things like these are still a part of Kashmir nonetheless at the moment? And maybe a plebiscite might actually better the situation rather than making it worse than it already is?
Again, this plebiscite we're talking about, it's again, Like you said, yes, agitation has been caused over here. It has always been a place of conflict. But then we come like we come to this point where we would stand and think whether we want another reason for mass agitation to be there, because it has always been there. And this will only give them another reason, because what the current situation of Kashmir, both the nations and both the governments have both the nations ke governments have been trying to establish peace over here. And in fact, the whole point behind the whole point behind Delhi make revoking Article 370 was establishing peace there, and keeping things in under control. But then, like I earlier said, it has had a history of agitation. And one might say, okay, I would say that to an extent I do agree with you. Yes, maybe a plebiscite would work, but again, I would again state the fact that this is Kashmir. It has been under conflict for more than 50 years. In around 70 years, it has been under conflict. It is impossible to avoid agitation over here, a- and a and a plebiscite would only lead to a full fledged, a very mass, what do you call it, a full fledged, full scale reform. And
Hmm.
that is not only going to happen on one side, on both the sides. And all the thing, and let's just take it like this. Kashmir was shattered. Kashmir was a shattered building. Let's take it an example of a building. It was a shattered building that has been trying to be built again and again. The bricks have been tried to put together. Things have been trying to put together, and it has still been fallen apart. However, the amount of rebuilding, I would call it the rebuilding process, that has been done till now, will all go to vain. It All the reforms, all the agreements, they will all go to square one. And technically speaking, and if and in the real even in the real world, it will again start from square one. And we have to agree on that.
Hmm. Right. I guess this is sort of where your opinion and my opinion would sort of differ because, I would actually argue that perhaps starting from square one in this specific case might not actually be a bad idea. But since this is something that obviously you and I are going to disagree on, I don't think there's any point in sort of lingering on it anymore. And so because of that, I sort of want to talk about the present situation of Kashmir and some of the policies of the Modi government that they've taken uh, uh, you know during recent times. They started off obviously after Article 370 was revoked. They began this lockdown of the region of Kashmir, and this was then followed by an internet ban being imposed upon them. And so the question that I have is, what are sort of your opinions, and what is the opinion of the general Indian population with regards to what actions the Modi government has taken in the region?
So, what happened during the Article 370 being imposed and being revoked? What happened was that around 10 or 11 days before it was about to be imposed, the area was under total lockdown, and tourists had been removed from there, given giving terror threats that there's a possible terror attack about to happen. And then even the now comes the most vital part: the internet and cellular networks were shut down in that region. And then 370 was revoked, and the 370 was removed, and it came under the central government. It became a part of the Indian constitution.
Mhm.
Now, what happened was, a lot of things changed. A lot of The biggest problem over here was, there were two sides of it. One, and now I would like to talk about the generation gap. One is the present generation that now started to suffer, because now was the point when, after a short break or a rest in that agitation that has been always been happening over here, that it started again. The lockdowns happened. The internet was taken away. Students had to suffer, families had to suffer. A total curfew was imposed over there, and the biggest part was the nation did not know what is happening out there. I mean, the internet services were only restored, even the social media was only restored in Kashmir in March, in the beginning of March, if I'm not wrong.
Mhm.
So all that time we did not know what is happening there, and there was definite suffering of families, especially of students aspiring to go to college, going to school, and a lot of distress did happen, and it was really harsh on the people of Kashmir, like it has always been.
Mhm. Right. So I think one question that I definitely do want to ask you is, you talked about the internet ban and how it was brought back during, I think, around the beginning of March. But I think one thing that we do need to understand is the internet that was brought back wasn't exactly, the normal speed that they used to get
Exactly, it
back in
was
the
a
day.
2G connection. I mean,
It was 2G
that
connection.
has
And
no relevance in today's
yeah,
world.
so something that I do want to keep in mind is considering the fact that we're all going through a global pandemic at the moment, and I think we all understand just how important something like the internet can be with regards to a pandemic. Obviously, there are new updates that are coming around every single day with regards to the constitution of how the virus is made up of and what the structure of it is like and what are the most recent guidelines for hospitals and so on and so forth. So don't you think that keeping these things in mind, maybe this would be the time for the Modi government to sort of come around and if nothing else, at least give the Kashmiris their internet back?
Exact. I agree with you on this because see, now the current situation of Kashmir under COVID-19, the latest most talked over topic was that there is only one COVID-19 relief center in all of that region, and that is in
Mhm.
Srinagar, if I'm not wrong.
Yep, yep, yep.
Now, one and let me get into some stats now. There or like a couple of days ago, I read this post where it said that uh, Kashmir has only one ventilator for 71,000 people, for every 71,000 people, one doctor for every 3,900 people, and on the contrary, one armed soldier for every 9 people. So,
Mhm.
and we are going through a pandemic right now. India has been having a very big boom of a huge boom of cases recently, especially in Delhi and all the northern regions. Now, again, now the government, what they did was they launched this online service where in all of Kashmir and Jammu they would get to know when there is a case, and they would get to know where there is stress regarding the virus, but they did not give them their real internet back. Over here we're talking on a 5G connection, and over there, like, not even 1,000 kilometers apart, they are living under 2G. I mean, that is like going back 10 years.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
either you don't give them the internet. I mean, what are you trying to establish by giving them a 2G service? I mean, even if they were, even if we keep the fact aside about Srinagar being the only relief center for COVID-19, even if they use the online service that they provided for for the distress relief regarding COVID-19, how will it function on a 2G internet in the mountains, that too, where there's already scarcity of networks, cellular networks? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. So I strongly agree with you on this, that they need to get their services back.
Absolutely. I mean, that is something that we both can agree on, and I'm glad that we finally sort of reached common ground on something at least, keeping the conflict in mind. So I think last question for you before we sort of end this entire thing off. What do you think is something, or maybe what are some of the things that Indian citizens in the region are currently doing to sort of maybe push the government towards helping the Kashmiris during this pandemic?
Right now, if we talk, are you talking about right now or around this time? I
Around
mean,
around
because
this
right
time,
now we're in
around this.
lockdown, huh? So right now we can't do anything. Technically, we are in a lockdown, complete lockdown. But there are a few organizations that are working towards providing food and providing required medicine and rations and stuff to people who cannot go to work, and daily wage laborers and stuff. So all that is happening. Apart from that, when things were a bit open, when the lockdown wasn't there, we had a few protests, especially in Delhi.
Mhm.
And Delhi recently, as you might know, had a big protest at Shine Bagh regarding the CEA slash NRC, which is a completely different topic. So we had a few things, lined up for Kashmir, and the relief system is trying to get there. But to be very honest, is now again agreeing with you, the military and and the already curfew that was launched over there, all that has led to us, I mean, and as by I mean all of India, have not been able to help them as much as we're helping people around over here. It's really difficult to reach that place in the first place. And you won't believe this, Kashmir, there was a region, I don't know the exact name, that was declared a super curfew zone, a super quarantine zone, without even having a single case, when they didn't even have a single case.
Mhm.
Now, again, it's there is again, this place has always been full of theories, and this is another thing that I cannot understand and that we cannot understand. Why is it happening again? But again, this is a global pandemic, and before anything, humanity comes first. And we are
Absolutely.
trying to, everyone is trying to cope at the moment, and that is the sole reason why we are not having such big international politics taking place.
Yeah, no, I mean, even in our last sort of discussion that we had with Aleha Janzeb, that I had with Aleha Janzeb, I mean, she too was mentioned when I asked her this question. She too was like, it's just very difficult to sort of reach the people of Kashmir because of the military presence. She was coming up with ways of maybe we could funnel money to them, but then she was like, they don't have access to the internet and they most likely don't have access to banking services. And then she was thinking that maybe we could set up education sort of classes online for some of the children over Zoom. But again, it all comes down to the fact that they don't have internet connection again. And you could think about maybe collecting a large sum of money to sort of buy equipment or buy food and send it to the region. But the chances of that equipment actually reaching the people, considering the
They're really
military presence, they're very slim. It's very likely that it would just get intercepted in the middle, and the equipment would either be sent back or someone else would take it in the way. But I guess we all can at the end of the day hope that the governments of not only India but both sides do sort of realize that the Kashmiris are suffering, and maybe they can one day sit on one table and sort of discuss the entire situation and come up to a solution that can sort of solve the agitation and reduce the problem. On the whole, Naman, once again, thank you very much for finding some time and coming on today for the discussion. This has
thank
been Lahori Talks. To all the audience that is currently watching this on Instagram or Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel because you're only watching the highlight reel, and it's obviously much more better for you guys to watch the entire discussion because there are a lot of points that get missed out when you're watching this as in the form of highlights rather than the full discussion. This has been Lahori Talks.